Imagine finding out that the deed to your house, the laws of your country, and, well, the authority of your government were all based on a single fragile lie. We are looking at a profound lecture by a political scientist, Dr. Alexander Wendt, his landmark academic paper called Sovereignty and the UFO, and some incredibly candid insights from a panel by the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies.
We are analyzing political science, sociology, and really the structural foundation of modern human civilization.
Wow.
Yeah, we're looking at the mechanics of why the existence of a superior non-human intelligence represents an absolute structural impossibility for the modern state.
Okay, let's unpack this, because if we want to understand the intense secrecy, the bizarre institutional behavior, and frankly, the mountains of locked-away data surrounding UFOs, we first have to understand the invisible bedrock of modern human governance.
Right.
A bedrock that our sources suggest UFOs fundamentally threaten to destroy. And everything points back to one very specific philosophical concept, which is anthropocentrism.
That is the core of the entire issue. Anthropocentrism is the unquestioned metaphysical assumption that humans are the absolute center of the universe. It's the baked-in belief that humans are the only intelligent life around, that our concerns are the ultimate measure of all value, and crucially for this discussion, that humans are the sole beings capable of holding ultimate authority or sovereignty over the Earth.
Right.
Every political system on the map today shares this single assumption.
So it doesn't really matter if you are looking at a democratic republic, a totalitarian dictatorship, or, a monarchy. They all inherently agree that humans, and only humans, are running the show.
Spot on. And that assumption forms the entire foundation of what political scientists call the social contract.
Okay, the social contract.
Yeah, this concept goes back centuries to thinkers like Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes basically argued that in a state of nature, human life is essentially a free-for-all. It's nasty, brutish, and short.
Right, just total chaos.
Exactly. So to escape that chaos, citizens make a collective deal. We agree to surrender our natural rights, specifically the right to use violence to settle our personal disputes, and we hand that monopoly on violence over to the state. In exchange, the state makes two massive, unbreakable promises. It promises to protect us from outside threats, and it promises to protect us from each other.
It is the ultimate trade-off of civilization.
Right.
You follow the rules, you pay your taxes, you don't attack your neighbor, and the government keeps you safe from invaders.
That's the deal.
But reading through Dr. Wendt's analysis, if UAPs turn out to be extraterrestrial, if they represent a non-human intelligence, that fundamental contract just evaporates.
It becomes entirely hollow. Let's look at the mechanics of why that happens. Suddenly, the state cannot fulfill its end of the bargain.
Because they can't protect us.
Right. If there is an extraterrestrial presence operating in our atmosphere or our oceans, displaying technology that makes our most advanced fighter jets look like, I don't know, paper airplanes, then Earth is suddenly their planet, not ours. Human governments would only be ruling at the pleasure of a vastly superior power.
That's terrifying.
Dr. Wendt points out a sobering analogy here. We wouldn't be looking at a situation like Cortez meeting the Aztecs. The technological and evolutionary gap would be more like mice compared to humans.
It's like finding out your landlord doesn't actually own your apartment building, and the real owner could show up and demolish the entire complex at any second without breaking a sweat.
That's exactly it.
Why on earth would you keep following the rules and paying rent to the fake landlord?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the functional behavior of the government starts to make perfect logical sense. Acknowledging UFOs threatens the anthropocentric assumption that gives the state its authority in the first place.
Right.
If a government is totally impotent to protect its citizens from an extraterrestrial presence, there is no logical, functional reason for citizens to obey that government.
Wow.
The entire justification for its power collapses on a philosophical level.
Okay, so the state is facing this existential threat that it cannot fight off with tanks or missiles. Since the sovereign power absolutely cannot fulfill its social contract against a superior non-human intelligence, it has to find a way to survive. And the survival mechanism is simply to avoid the issue entirely.
Which manifests as what Dr. Wendt calls the UFO taboo. Because anthropocentric sovereignty is so incredibly fragile, it has to create a strict, heavily enforced taboo against investigating UAPs.
It has to.
Ignoring the phenomenon isn't a bureaucratic mistake or like a lack of curiosity. It is functionally necessary for the state's survival. The sovereign power represses the UFO out of fear of what analyzing it would reveal about the state's own weakness.
And the sources detail exactly how this taboo operates day to day. It creates something Dr. Wendt calls the epistemology of ignorance,
Right.
which is really just a fancy way of saying the authorities know that UFOs aren't extraterrestrial simply by aggressively refusing to ask what they actually are. They
Yeah.
confirm their bias by actively choosing not to look.
It is a remarkable trick of modern governmentality. Science and the state are deeply intermeshed, you know? Science relies on state funding, and the state relies on scientific authority to legitimize its decisions.
Yeah, they feed each other.
Together, they use their combined authority to normalize the idea that UFOs are not a real subject of serious inquiry. We see the mechanics of this beautifully illustrated in the 1990 Belgian F-16 incident.
Oh, the details of this case are absolutely wild. We aren't talking about, like, a blurry photograph in the woods here.
No, not at all.
In March of 1990, the Belgian Air Force scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets to intercept a massive, unidentified object hovering over Brussels.
Let's break down the data they actually captured, because this wasn't just a visual anomaly. Ground control radar was painting the object. The pilots then visually confirmed the target, and they achieved radar lock with their onboard systems 3 separate times.
3 times.
We were talking about hard mechanical sensor data, and each time they got a lock, the object responded with violent, physics-defying, evasive maneuver.
Yeah, the maneuvers were crazy.
In one instance, dropping thousands of feet in a fraction of a second, achieving speeds that would have imposed gravitational forces of 40 Gs.
To put the physical reality of 40 Gs in perspective for you, a highly trained human fighter pilot in a G-suit typically passes out around 9 Gs.
Right.
At 40 Gs, a human body would be pulverized, and the F-16 airframe itself would physically rip apart in the sky. And yet, despite military radar tracking an object doing the impossible, mainstream science essentially shrugged its shoulders and looked the other way.
Because taking that radar data seriously would violate the taboo, skeptics within the mainstream scientific community often fall into the trap of assuming we are alone, or they point to the Fermi paradox, arguing that the vast distances and the speed of light make interstellar travel impossible.
Right, they just dismiss it outright.
So they demand what sociologists call White House lawn proof, meaning unless a craft physically lands on the lawn of the White House and the occupants shake hands with the president, any other evidence, even hard multi-sensor military data, is dismissed as a glitch or an anomaly.
But the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies panel and Dr. Wendt both point out that this attitude is fundamentally unscientific. It's actually anti-science.
Completely. They argue that by strictly adhering to this taboo, science is risking a massive type 2 error.
Okay, explain that.
In statistical analysis, a type I error is accepting a false explanation, like believing a weather balloon is an alien spacecraft.
Right.
But a type 2 error is rejecting a true explanation. By demanding absolute, undeniable proof before even bothering to look at the Belgian radar data, the scientific community is refusing to study UAPs systematically.
Wow.
They are risking a type 2 error of cosmic proportions just to protect the anthropocentric worldview.
Well, wait, I have to push back here. Haven't things drastically changed over the last few years?
No, so?
Well, the Pentagon recently came out and officially admitted that UAPs are real. They released videos. They even called them a national security threat. And we've had open congressional hearings about it. Doesn't that completely break the taboo you're talking about?
On the surface, it seems like a paradigm shift, sure. But the analysis from our sources suggests a much more calculated maneuver. What the Pentagon is doing right now is securitizing the issue rather than scientizing it.
Securitizing it.
Yeah.
Okay, meaning they are treating it strictly as a physical military problem.
Exactly. By framing UAPs strictly as a national security threat, operating under the public assumption that these objects might be breakthrough drone technology from geopolitical rivals like Russia or China, the military achieves 2 things.
Okay.
First, they secure massive research funding. Second, they maintain the justification to keep all the high-fidelity data heavily classified.
Oh, that makes sense.
It is a brilliant bureaucratic defense mechanism because it completely avoids the metaphysical threat. It keeps the problem confined to human adversaries, effectively sidestepping the existential crisis of a non-human intelligence.
Wow. So they're basically saying, yes, there are incredibly advanced objects in our airspace, but don't worry, it's just human politics as usual. Give us more money to build better radar. That is a fascinating deflection, but that raises a massive question for me. If the state is going to these incredible lengths to maintain the taboo, what exactly are they so terrified will happen if the taboo breaks?
This brings us to the psychological fallout for the general public.
Mm-hmm.
To understand the state's terror, we have to look at a concept called ontological security.
Ontological security. Okay, let's define that.
While physical security is about protecting our physical bodies from harm, ontological security is about the security of our identity, our sense of self, and our fundamental understanding of reality.
Mm-hmm.
You could call it the security of the human soul. Human beings require a relatively stable, predictable conception of the world to function on a day-to-day basis. We need to know our place in the hierarchy.
And the sources use a fantastic pop culture analogy to explain this. The movie The Truman Show.
Yes. Discovering that UAPs are extraterrestrial would be a collective global trauma akin to Truman Burbank discovering that his entire life, his entire world, was nothing more than a staged television construct.
Right, that everything is fake.
Realizing that human history, with all our wars and achievements, is just a tiny, localized subset of a much larger, uncontrollable reality, that would be an incredible ontological shock.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Dr. Went points out that it doesn't even matter if these extraterrestrials are completely friendly and peaceful.
No, it doesn't.
They don't have to invade. They don't have to fire a single laser beam at us. They still pose a massive ontological threat simply by existing, because their very presence shatters the anthropocentric worldview that holds society together.
And the societal reaction to that shattered worldview is what keeps intelligence officials up at night. The sources predict 3 distinct public reactions to disclosure, and every single one of them effectively destroys public trust and state cohesion.
Let's walk through them. The first predicted reaction is greed.
Right. If the anthropocentric world is ending, and the state's authority is exposed as an illusion, a certain percentage of the population will simply say, let's party.
Yeah.
You would likely see apocalyptic partying, massive looting, and severe crime sprees, because the long-term consequences usually enforced by the state's justice system suddenly mean absolutely nothing.
Like, why worry about a 10-year prison sentence if human laws are irrelevant?
Exactly.
The second predicted reaction is fear. And we aren't just talking about a fear of aliens, but a profound terror of an unknown, unpredictable future.
This is the societal panic response. You would almost certainly see a total collapse of global stock markets as consumer confidence in the future just evaporates.
Well, for sure.
You'd see people fleeing urban centers, heading to the mountains with weapons, forming unauthorized armed resistance groups, or engaging in vigilantism because they believe extraterrestrials might be infiltrating society.
Just total paranoia.
The state completely loses its monopoly on violence.
Okay, so greed causes chaos and fear causes violence. But the third reaction, which the sources argue is perhaps the most dangerous to the state, is wonder.
Yes, wonder.
I have to admit, that confused me at first. I get fear and greed. But if people are experiencing wonder and awe, shouldn't that unify us? Why would wonder be a threat?
You would think a unified sense of awe would be positive, but from the perspective of the state, wonder is incredibly dangerous. Think about the mechanics of human devotion.
Okay.
Disclosure would likely trigger the rise of naturalistic UFO religions. People would be profoundly drawn to these beings, wanting to learn from them, or hoping to be saved by them, either through advanced medical technology or spiritual enlightenment.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about that.
If people start worshiping an extraterrestrial intelligence as gods or saviors, they totally bypass their civic loyalty. The state loses its monopoly on devotion.
Right. Who cares about the local city council or federal tax laws when you were looking for salvation from an interstellar civilization?
Exactly. It breaks the system completely.
That makes total sense. So the state is looking at a cocktail of chaos, violence, and total civic apathy. That is a recipe for the complete collapse of modern infrastructure.
And this is exactly why institutions double down on denial. To prevent this societal collapse, they feel a moral imperative to maintain the illusion. But this defense mechanism comes at a very steep cost to democratic governance and scientific progress.
Our sources refer to this as the noble lie, a philosophical concept going all the way back to Plato. The idea is that the ruling class actively lies to the public in order to keep them in ignorant bliss, ostensibly for their own good, to keep society functioning.
But the physical result of enforcing this institutional denial is the death of democratic transparency. To maintain the taboo, you have to create a deeply entrenched deep state.
Right.
You need unelected groups deep within the bowels of the military and intelligence bureaucracies that hoard data without any public oversight, congressional accountability, or peer review.
And we heard the frustration about this directly from the SCU panel discussion. They highlight the massive scientific cost of this secrecy. Because of the UFO taboo and rampant overclassification, all the best data is heavily siloed.
Which is the exact opposite of how the scientific method is supposed to function. The scientific panel discussed the desperate need for multimodal approaches.
Yeah, multimodal.
In science, you don't just want to look at a fuzzy video. You want to combine data from multiple independent sensors, infrared cameras, active radar tracks, acoustic sensors, and electromagnetic frequency detectors.
Mm-hmm.
When all those sensors point to the exact same physical anomaly, you can start doing real science.
Right. But here is the maddening part. The military is capturing this exact kind of multimodal data. We have billion-dollar Aegis radar systems on naval destroyers capturing UAPs pulling impossible maneuvers.
Yep, credible data.
But what happens? An intelligence analyst sees the data, realizes it demonstrates a flight capability that surpasses human technology, and they slap a derivative classification on it, like a special access program.
Mm-hmm.
That multimodal data gets locked in a vault to keep it away from foreign adversaries, which means civilian scientists at Harvard or MIT never get to analyze it.
The bureaucratic mechanics of classification are actively weaponized to prevent scientific inquiry. And it isn't just the technical sensor data being ignored. The sources bring up fascinating dissertation research analyzing what they call the human sensor.
Oh, yeah.
The eyewitness data over the last 70 years is incredibly consistent, but utterly ignored.
This blew my mind. We have detailed, credible reports from military personnel describing what we now call tic-tac-shaped objects, smooth, white cylinders with no wings and no exhaust.
Right.
We have reports of them interacting with military assets in 1953. Then we see the exact same physical description in the famous 2004 Nimitz encounter, and again in 2014 off the East Coast.
But because of the taboo, sociologists and physical scientists are blocked from openly analyzing this 70-year data set. If they apply for a grant to study it, they are laughed out of the room.
Because to formally analyze the historical data would be to admit the phenomenon is real, which breaks the epistemology of ignorance.
This raises an important question for how human civilization moves forward. Should UAP science be a national security secret at all? Or should it be an international, globally funded effort?
That's a great question.
If we are genuinely dealing with a non-human intelligence, it is no longer a national issue between competing human countries. It is a global issue concerning the human species as a whole.
So what does this all mean? It means that national security is actively being used as a shield to hide global insecurity. The state uses the very real excuse of keeping advanced technology away from rival human nations to avoid confronting an ontological shock that affects all of humanity equally.
The structures built to protect us physically, our militaries, our intelligence agencies, our classification systems are actively holding us back intellectually and philosophically. They are protecting the anthropocentric map by refusing to let us look at the territory.
Let's briefly recap the incredible journey we've just been on. We started by exploring how the anthropocentric worldview, the deeply held belief that humans rule the Earth, makes UFOs a metaphysical threat to the government. We examined how the state creates a UFO taboo and uses an epistemology of ignorance to protect the social contract.
We dove into the mechanics of the Belgian F-16 radar data to see how science ignores truth to maintain that taboo. We analyzed the terrifying potential of an ontological Truman Show-style shock, where greed, fear, and wonder could tear apart the fabric of society.
Right.
And finally, we looked at how this fear results in a noble lie that weaponizes classification, silos multimodal data, and destroys democratic transparency.
So why should you care about all of this? Why does this matter to your everyday life? Because this isn't just a fun thought experiment about whether aliens are flying around in our skies.
No, it's not.
It is about the absolute limits of human knowledge. It is about how much you trust your institutions to tell you the truth, and whether our society is actually resilient enough to handle a reality that is vastly larger than itself.
It forces us to question the map we've been handed since birth. It asks us to consider who drew the lines and why they want us looking down at the paper instead of up at the stars.
Which leads us to a final, provocative thought to mull over. Our sources make a compelling case that discovering the truth about UAPs would absolutely destroy the anthropocentric worldview that currently dominates our global system.
Yes.
But considering that this exact same human-centric worldview is arguably responsible for endless resource wars, environmental destruction, and profound geopolitical division, is its destruction actually a bad thing?
That's the real question.
Perhaps the people who finally confirm this dangerous knowledge will be the last humans as we currently define ourselves. And in letting that old, isolated identity die, They will give birth to a completely new, post-anthropocentric human society.
It is a terrifying but potentially beautiful evolution of the human species.
So the next time you look at that beautifully colored, perfectly ordered map of the world, remember, the borders only exist as long as we don't look up and realize the landlord might be coming home.